Good day. I am your mom Rina, your subject teacher in Philippine politics and governance. Today, we are going to discuss about concept of state and nation. Our objective for today is to analyze the relationship among nations and states in the context of globalization.
So what is a nation? In Latin word, it is called nasi, where the term nation came from, which means born, giving it a racial or ethnic in meaning. Etymologically, it refers to a birthplace, therefore, it is generally used to describe an ethnic, linguistic, or cultural community. Thus, it may also define as group of people bound together by commonalities in language, history, traditions, and religion. So, there are two classifications of nation. One is ethnic nation and territorial nation. So what is an ethnic nation? It is an entity that is united on the basis of ethnicity. It is populated more or less by a single ethnic group. Like for example, the community of our Muslim brothers who shares same ethnicity even with different territories. Japan also is one example of ethnic nation. The second is a territorial nation. It is an entity that covers a predefined territory which was populated by different ethnic groups that have assimilated as a nation. For example, is the Philippines. We have different ethnic groups, but we assimilate ourselves as a Filipino. Also, the Asian nation, we are considered as Asian, even with different ethnicity and descent, but we are one as Asian. Now, what is a state? A state is a community of persons, more or less numerous, permanently occupying a great body of inhabitants, render obedience, and enjoying freedom from external control. Agreements signed by countries in Montevideo, Uruguay, a standard of definition of state. It stipulated that all states were equal, sovereign units consisting of permanent population, defined territorial boundaries, a government, and an ability to enter into agreements.
There are four elements of a state: people, territory, government, and sovereignty. Now, let us discuss each of these elements.
Let's first discuss the people. People. There must be people residing who should be numerous to be governed and self-sufficient. It should also be more or less numerous for defense and both sexes, present for perpetuity. Example is the Vatican, a state within a state. They are less numerous but can govern and self-sufficient. Another is the territory. It is an area over which territory has effective control. A fixed portion of the surface of the earth in which people reside that is sufficient to provide the needs of the inhabitants. It is a big enough to be self-sufficient but small enough to be administered and defended. But there are modes of acquiring territory. The following are the ways or modes how a state can acquire its territory. First is discovery and occupation. A state can acquire a certain territory when it discovers a certain place and occupy it for a long period of time. The place should be terra nullius or land belonging to no one. A certain territory can be acquired only by discovery. It should be possessed and administered by the state that discovered it. Example is the Spratly Island. This is the basis of the Philippines why we are claiming it as our own. Another modes of acquiring territory is the prescription. It is a long, continued, and adverse possession to vest acquisitive title in the claimant. The acquisition of territory by an adverse holding through a long term of years requires two essential facts. One is continuous, two, undisturbed possession. Example is this is the Las Palmas case. Even if Spain discovered and occupied this territory, the Netherlands acquires the same by virtue of prescription as it exercised sovereign rights over the island for more than 200 years after its discovery by Spain. Why do the Philippines not under Spain since we are occupied for more than 300 years? That is called cession. It is a transfer of territory from one state to another by agreement. It may be a bilateral agreement whereby one state transfers sovereignty over a definite portion of territory to another state. This may be voluntary or by force. Example is the Sabah, Malaysia, ceded by British Empire. Another is the subjugation or conquest. It is a formal annexation of a territory after it has been conquered in the course of war. This mostly happened during early times. Example of this is the colonies of countries. Philippines during Spanish era. Another is the accretion. It is the increase in the land area of a state caused by the operation of the forces of nature or artificially through human labor. Example are Chinese reclamation in West Philippine Sea or the Mischief Reef or some part of Spratly Islands. Another element of a state is the government. It is an agency or instrumentality through which the will of the state is formulated, expressed, and realized. It was established by inhabitants, which was organized in exercising control over and capable of maintaining law and order within the territory. It is the system that put in place to govern the state. Another is the sovereignty. This is the supreme and uncontrollable power in a state by which that state is governed. An entity is not a state unless it has competence within its own constitutional system to conduct international relation with other states, as well as the political and financial capabilities to do so. There are two aspects of sovereignty, internal and external. The internal is the ability of a state to exercise its authority over its territory and people. Example is the totality on how the government rules its people. External is the relationship of the state with other states, the freedom from external control. Example, no other states dictates how the government should be governed or run.
Now, how state is created?
State is created through revolution, unification, succession, assertion of independence, agreement, and attainment of civilization. State is created through revolution. It refers to a movement, often violent, to overthrow an old regime and effect a complete change in the fundamental institution of society. Example of this is the American Revolution and our very own EDSA Revolution. There is a change in the structure of government. Another is the unification. This is the process of being united or made into a whole where many states joined together to form as one. One example of this is the Germany. Another is the succession. This is the act of separating from a nation or state and become independent. Example, Timor-Leste, with the help of UN, Indonesia ceded its claim. This is what Taiwan wants from China, also those pro-democracy in Hong Kong. Another is the assertion of independence. This is the act of stating something or exercising authority confidently and forcefully. Example is the former Yugoslavia Kosovo. Another is the agreement. It is negotiated and typically legally binding arrangement between parties as to course of actions. Example are the Netherlands. Another is the attainment of civilization, process by which society is or place reach an advanced stage of social civilization. Example, Mesopotamia by is now Iran and Iraq. Now, what is the concept of nation-state? Nation-state is a term refers a political institution that combines the concepts of nation and state. It refers to a state inhabited by people who identify themselves as a nation on account of common culture, history, language, ethnicity, or other factors. A nation is composed of many states, like the Muslim nation. It is composed of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, and many more.
To clearly understand the differences between a state from a nation, here are some. A state is an independent political entity with clear geographic boundaries. A nation is a large population that shares the same culture, language, traditions, and history.
Here are more differences. A state is an independent political entity with fixed geographic boundaries, while nation is a large body of people united by common origin, history, culture, ethnicity, or language. A state refers to a territory. A nation refers to a group of people. A state has a fixed territory, while nation doesn't have a fixed territory. A state has a political and legal entity, while nation has a socio-cultural entity. A state can be created consciously, but a nation cannot be created consciously. A state is not as stable as state, but nation is more stable than a nation. A state cannot exist without sovereignty, but a nation can exist without sovereignty. A state is united by laws and regulations, but nation is united by bonds and shared histories.
Now, let's have an activity. You just have to apply what you have learned.
There are phrases written as your guide. Your answer will reflect the level of your understanding and appreciation of the lesson. You just have to fill in the blanks and write your answer in your answer sheet. Now start and enjoy!
Now, let's proceed to the concept of globalization.
What is a globalization? According to Haywood, he defined globalization as a process through which societies have become so intertwined or interconnected that events and decisions in one part of the world have significant effects on the lives of people in the other part of the world. It implies opening of local nationalistic perspective to a broader outlook of interconnected and interdependent world. This globalization integrates states by interchange of worldviews, products, ideas, and other aspects of culture. How is globalization in the Philippines? Here in the Philippines, the domestic and political policies change because of events happening in international arena. For example, the shift of TESDA training to BPO-related skills to cater the demand of outsourcing companies. Also, the shift of 10 years curriculum in basic education curriculum to K-12 program is an outset of global requirement. What are the features of globalization? Do globalization needs to happen? Globalization conjoined with the fast improvement of technologies, the improvement of communication, transportation, and trade strategies fast-track the process of interconnectedness of countries. How and why does this happen? What are the characteristics of globalization as a phenomenon? Haywood enumerates its features. These are: number 1, declining relevance of geographical distance. This is the use of internet connectivity virtually shortens the distance between and among the people of different states. Number 2, lessening significance of territorial boundaries. This is the development in air, water, and land transportation delimits the movement of people between states. Number 3, deepening and broadening of political processes such that the local, national, and global events constantly interact. This is the state personalities can now exchange ideas in real time, talk diplomatically for the improvement of both states. Several forms of globalization can be identified, of which Haywood listed 3: economic, cultural, and political. So the following are the forms and examples of globalization. One form of globalization is the economic. All economies have been integrated in a global economy. There is an increasing interdependence of world economies as a result of the growing scale of cross-border trade of commodities and services, flow of international capital, and wide and rapid spread of technologies. One example is the internationalized production and global supply chains now standardized for manufacture of many devices, it ranging from cars to smartphones. Take a look of what is happening to Huawei. Its parts came from manufacturers in the Western countries which were affected by political clash between China and US. Another form of globalization is the cultural. This is a phenomenon by which the experience of everyday life, as influenced by the diffusion of commodities and ideas, reflects a standardization of cultural expression around the world. Information, commodities, and images from one part of the world make cultural differences between nations and individuals less significant. One example of this is the McDonaldization, or what George Ritzer called as rationalization, that Max Weber found in bureaucracies extended to fast food chains. This then leads to standardization of processes such as production. Also, global brands penetrating the local scene. Uniqlo and other brands abroad are now here in the Philippines. We are now integrating the shoe and fashion culture of other countries. The third form of globalization is the political. This is the growth of worldwide political system, the importance of international organizations, transnational organizations, and non-governmental organizations is being recognized. Example is the creation of World Trade Organization, which tackles trade industries among member states. Also, the influence on domestic issues of organizations such as the United Nations, World Trade Organization, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, International Red Cross, and Worldwide Fund for Nature. So now, what are the effects of globalization as to economy? The developed states enjoys the advantage in the balance of opportunities and threats. In contrast, the underdeveloped and developing countries remain dependent on developed countries. They are mired in poverty and remain in competition with other poor states in the export of agricultural produce and minerals. So, what are the effects of globalization in developed states? To gain upper hand in economic competitiveness, developed states adopted new policies. Some developed countries privatized their publicly owned companies and pruned down their budget deficits to manageable levels, reduced their taxes, and abolished shoddy stock market because of international competition and monopolies. So, what are the effects of globalization in developing countries? The impact of globalization in developing countries in terms in economy is far greater than in developed countries. Developing countries only rely on single or less export product. They are not diversified. Middle East, for example, their product is mainly oil. Without oil revenue, their economy will falter.
That's the end of our lesson. Have you learned something today? Now, get ready for our second activity. Get your answer sheet and enjoy learning. Now, get ready for our parallel test. Hope you learned something today. Again, I am your Mom Rina, your subject teacher in Philippine Politics and Governance. Until next time, bye!